In the previous video, we talked about why monopolies are not efficient. We saw that monopolies actually take up a large portion of the consumer surplus and leaves a large deadweight loss in the economy or in the market. In this video, what we're going to look at is when monopolies are efficient, because we know that sometimes monopolies are actually more efficient than when the market is a perfect competition, and which is why government actually allow monopolies to exist. Theoretically speaking, if a firm can produce something at a very, very low cost, let's say C naught. So if a firm can produce a C naught, a very, very small cost, as compared to a firm that will produce a very large cost, let's say C1, then we know that the firm that can produce at C naught, very small cost, is more efficient than a firm that can produce at C1. And what we're trying to look at here is actually the cost per unit, because we know that the firm doesn't actually produce just one unit of output. The firm produces multiple units of output. So what we're concerned about here is not the cost per se, but then we are concerned about the average cost of the firm. So as we recall, the average cost of the firm, the average cost is actually equal to the cost function, which is C of Q divided by Q. And what is the C of Q? The C of Q is actually just the fixed cost plus a variable cost divided by Q. Let's say that we have a firm, let me just scroll down a bit. Let's say that we have a firm who incurs a fixed cost of 1,000, so let's set that FC is equal to 1,000, and a variable cost, very simple variable cost of 5Q. Now, what is the average cost of this firm? Well, if we substitute FC and VC, or these numbers, or these values for FC and VC, what we find is that the average cost of our theoretical firm is actually equal to 1,000 divided by Q plus 5. And let's try to analyze this average cost right here, this average cost that we have. And we can see that as Q increases, the average cost actually goes down. And we can see because Q here is a denominator, and as Q increases, let's say to 1,000 maybe, if Q becomes 1,000, then AC, where Q is equal to 1,000, would be equal to 1 plus 5, which is equal to 6. Whereas if Q was equal to just 1, if Q was equal to 1, then AC would be equal to 1,000 plus 5, which is equal to 1,005, which is way, way, way larger than 6. And so we see that if this firm was able to produce at a very, very large quantity, let's say a limit of infinity, we could actually say that the average cost when this firm produces infinite quantities of output would be equal to 5, right? Okay, so let's add something else in our reasoning here. Let's talk about demand. Let's say that the market demand in this case, the market demand is equal to, so QD, let's say that market demand is actually equal to 500. And let's say that for some reason this firm is a monopolist, and this firm would produce the maximum quantity that it can produce to satisfy this entire market, which is 500 units. So let's say that this firm, despite being a monopolist, would produce 500 units of output. And so if it produces 500 units of output, its average cost would be equal to 1,000 divided by 500 plus 5, which is just equal to 7. Let's just make a mental note that 7 is the average cost when this firm is a monopolist, meaning it's the only firm in the market and the entire demand belongs to it, and it produces a quantity equal to, or a quantity that is socially optimal. Now, let's consider a case where this firm is not the only firm that produces in this market, but rather, let's say that there are now 10 firms that produce in this market, and each of these firms share a equal proportion of the market. Meaning, if initially this firm had 500 and now there are 10 firms, each firm has 50 quantity demand on their end. And let's say that again, this firm would produce a quantity equal to quantity demand. So the firm would again produce 50 units of output because there are now 10 firms in the market. So AC in this case would be equal to 1000 divided by 50 plus 5. And this would be equal to 25. This would be equal to 25. And we see that the less this firm actually produces, the higher the average cost is for the good. In other words, let me scroll down a little bit again. In other words, if there is only one firm in the market, average cost is the lowest or lower than when there are two or more firms in the market. Or rather, monopolies are efficient when the average cost of one firm existing in the market is lower than the average cost of two or more firms existing in the market. And this is actually what we call natural monopolies. Natural monopolies. And we actually see a large number of examples of natural monopolies are actually firms that have high fixed costs. And examples of these are electricity, water, telecoms, mostly utility, because they have to incur this large fixed cost in order to serve or produce something. This is an insert, but a natural monopoly, actually, when we look at it graphically, when we look at the graphic average cost of a natural monopoly, we would see that the average cost is actually strictly decreasing. And so that is what characterizes a natural monopoly, a strictly declining average cost.